So we're so happy for this big turn up on this webinar. And my guess is that this really signals the interest of a lot of people to listen to the perspectives of the small-scale fishers about the guidelines. And this is excellent. So just to mention some of you, that we have a large number of NGOs present. For instance, Flora and Fauna International, Ocean Unite, Ocean North. We have EDF, Environmental Development Fund. We have WWF, we have Conservation International, Blue Ventures, World Conservation Society, and Oceana. So very much welcome all of you. And there too, we also have some other organizations like the International Pole and Line Foundation, RARE, Remmer Family Foundation, and also Too Big to Ignore is part of the webinar. Very much welcome. And then we have at least one, I think maybe two representatives of the Friends of the Guidelines, which both representatives from Tanzania and from Norway through NORAD. And this is really lovely. And then we have representation also from indigenous peoples. In addition to IITC, I think we have some representatives from ICCA in this webinar, the ICCA Consortium. Welcome. And we have colleagues from FAO and the Oak Foundation and WorldFish, and a number of scientists as well that are focusing on small-scale fishers. Very much welcome. And last but definitely not least, we have all the advisory groups of IPC and the Global Strategic Framework. So I would actually like you to wave your hands. We have representatives both from the global advisory group and from the regional advisory group. So if you feel that you're part of this group, maybe you can just wave so we see how you are. We have Ravadi and Rochelle and Naseegh, Edith Rudit, and Nimal. Wonderful. Sorry if I'm missing out on someone, but that's great to have you on board to bounce these issues further in discussion and question and answer session in the end. So we have a really nice, I think, outline in front of us. First of all, we want to show a couple of videos that's going to give you a sense of the life of small-scale fishers and the political need for the guidelines. And then we'll have representatives from both academia and from FAO and from civil society sharing their perspectives and experiences of the guidelines, historically how it was developed and how it's being implemented, and also looking into the future. And all questions and answers we will raise in the end, and we will also have an open discussion in the end. So we look very much forward and hope that we'll have good time for that as well in the end. So in this webinar, we practice Chatham House rules, which implies that you're free to use the information that is raised during the webinar, but that neither the identity nor the affiliation of the participants expressing a view will be revealed. Our hope with this is that that this will as individuals and to express views that might not be those of your specific organization, and that this therefore can hopefully encourage a more free discussion in the end. So with those words, I'd like to introduce the first videos from small-scale fishers. They will be shown three right after one another, so I'm going to give a small introduction to each one of them. And we're so glad to, in the last minute, actually, we had colleagues around the world making these videos happen. So the first one, we will meet Aruna Roshanta from Sri Lanka, and he's a member of NAFSO, the National Fisheries Solidarity Organization of Sri Lanka. And he is a trade union leader and a small-scale fisherman from Pitipana and from Negombo. And he goes to sea daily, and most often with one other fisherman that joins him. And he works very closely with NAFSO on small-scale fisheries issues. And right after that, we're going to see another video from South Africa where we will meet Rosie Shoshala, a fisherwoman and fish processor from Lambert Bay, a fishing community situated in the West Atlantic coast of South Africa. And she's a coastal links leader in the Lamberts Bay. And the last video, we're grateful to Ravadi to have been sharing from Thailand. It's produced by the Sustainable Development Foundation. And this video has been translations available as PDF. We were struggling until the last minute to get the translation and subtitles in the videos, but now they're just as PDFs. I hope you could all hear me. It seems like my connection went down. Anna, or yeah, now we'll see the videos.
I was a fisher, and since childhood I was involved in fishing activities. When my father came from sea, I must wash his boat, I must wash his care. And from the age of 11 years old, I started work in the lobster factory as a packer. After school, go straight to the factory and start working until tomorrow, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. After school, I became involved on the harbor for 3-4 years, and that was in the 80s. For 3-4 years after that, I decided to go to sea. It was like anything a man can do, I can also do it, because the same God created man, created woman. The same God give men 2 hands and a mind, also gave me 2 hands and a mind. So I thought it's not impossible for me to work at sea. That's why I was going to work at sea. In the apartheid, I was an activist for freedom, and that's the reason my woman proud don't let me to go to clean another lady's house, because I'm not a servant of anyone, I'm a servant of God. And that's why I decided to work on the sea, because there's no one telling you when you can eat, when you can take a break, when you can do anything you want to do. There's no boss there. You're your own boss. Your life is in the hands of God. And that's the reason I choose to work at sea. And the sea got a spiritual effect on me. Every day when I come from sea, my spirit is in a better space than the morning. We are about 8 people in this shack. So when we work in this shack, it's 8 households that have an income. But with the apartment, they don't issue the fish permits on time. The snook is here for about a month already, but we as a community received our fish permit last week, and the fish permits are not correct. The snook is not here for the whole year. If it's here for the whole year, it's fine. 60 snooks a day is fine. You don't have to save your money for winter time. But the snook run is only for 2.5, 3 months. So you have to save money for winter time when there's no snook, no other species, and bad weather, none whatsoever. No pension fund, no UIF, no medical fund, nothing. You must sort that things out yourself. For me, it's really a need for the fishers to have a pension fund. Because when they become 55, 60, their body don't feel like fishing anymore. And then there's nothing for them.
අනික් කාරණාව කාටවත් යටත් නොවි තමන්ට අභිමානයක් තියාගෙන ගරුත්වයක් ලබා ගන්න පුළුවන් රැකියාවක්. මම දීව රැකියාවේ දෙන්නේ විශේෂයෙන් ප්‍රධාන තමයි මේ බිලිපිති වලින් මාළු අල්ලන්නේ. ඒ වගේම පණ ඉස්සු අරන් ගිහිල්ලා රැකියාව කරන අය ඉන්නවා. පණ මාළු අරන් ගිහිල්ලා රැකියාව කරන අය ඉන්නවා. ඊට අමතරව මැරිච්ච මාළු අරන් ගිහිල්ලා රැකියාව කරන අය ඉන්නවා. දැල් දාලා රැකියාව කරන අය ඉන්නවා. සාමාන්‍යයෙන් දෙන්නෙක් තමයි යන්නේ. සමහරවිට 3 දෙනෙක් යනවා. මම මේ කතා කරන්නේ පොඩි සුළු පන්න පොඩි බෝට් වල. දැනට මගේ එක්සත් දිවර සමිතියේ මේ ඒරියා එකේ සාමාන්‍යයෙන් රැකියාව යොදනා බෝට් 150ක් විතර. ඊට අමතරව ඉස්සු අරන් යන පණ ඉස්සු අරන් යන බෝට් එක 4 දෙනෙක් හෝ 5 දෙනෙක් යනවා. සාමාන්‍යයෙන් මිනිස්සු 200ක් වගේ ඒ රැකියාවේ පමණක් යෙදෙනවා. එතකොට අපේ දීවරේ සාමාන්‍යයෙන් පැය 8ක් වගේ වැඩ කරනවා මූදේ. 8ක් 10ක් වගේ. මූදේ ගොඩක් කුණු තියෙනවා. ඉතින් විශාල බාධාවක් ඒක. මාළු ප්‍රජනනයට බාධාවක් නොවෙන්නේ. ඉතින් මාළු අඩු වෙනවා. එන්න මාළු වෙනවා. ඒ වගේම ආණ්ඩුව හැම වෙලේම සහයෝගය දක්වන්නේ තහනම් රැකියාව කරන්න. දැන් දීවර පණතේ ගත්තොත් බොටම් ට්‍රෝලින් තහනම් කරන්න බෑ. නමුත් කරනවනේ. දැන් කරන්න බලපත්‍ර දීලා තියෙනවා. ඉතින් තහනම් පන්න කියන්නේ විනාශකාරී පන්න වලට ආණ්ඩුව මූලිකත්ව ලබා දෙන පහුගිය කාලේ දෛල දැල් සුරුක්කු දැල් කියන ඒවා කරන්න දෙනවා. දැන් අංගුස් දැල් සාමාන්‍ය ළඟ තියාගන්න ඕන කඩේක විකුණන්න තියෙනවා. ඒ මේ ආණ්ඩුව විතරක් නෙමෙයි හැම ආණ්ඩුවක්ම එහෙමයි. මිනිස්සුන්ගේ ප්‍රශ්න විසඳුවේ නැහැ. නමුත් මිනිස්සු තමයි මේ බර ඔක්කොම උහුලන් යන්නේ. අමාත්‍යාංශේ වැඩ කරන දහස් ගානකට වැටුප් කියන්නේ අපි. නමුත් දැන් දීවර කාර්යාලයක් මීගම තියෙන අපි අහවොත් ප්‍රශ්නයක් දීවර කාර්යාලයෙන් මීගමේ මොනවද දීවරට වෙලා තියෙන්නේ කියලා මොකක්ද වෙලා තියෙන්නේ මම දන්නේ නැහැ. විශාලම බාධාව තමයි දීවර කර්මාන්තයේ පිළිබඳව මනා වැටහීමක් තියෙන දැනීමක් තියෙන කෙනෙක් දීවර අමාත්‍යාංශේ පාලනය නොකිරීම. ඉන්න එක්කෙනෙකුට දීවර කර්මාන්තය කියන දේශීය දීවර කර්මාන්තය කියන දැනීමක් නෑ. අහනාදර දෙනවා කියන්නම දීවරේ පල්ලෙහාට වැටිලා කියන එක. අහනාදර දෙන්න වෙලා තියෙනවා. ඒක අහනාදර දෙන එක නෙවෙයි විය යුත්තේ. කර්මාන්තය දිනු කරන්න අවශ්‍ය කරන බෑග්ග්‍රවුන්ඩ් එක මහමූදේද ගොඩබිමද හදන එක. කෙටියෙන්ම කියනවා නම් කිසිම සහයෝගයක් නැහැ. ආරක්ෂාව අපි ලබා ගන්න ඕනේ. අපි ඒ කියන්නේ අපිට මෙහෙමයි කියලා ආරක්ෂාව පේන්නේ නැහැ. නාවික හමුදාව තියෙනවා මොහොතේ. ගොඩබිමත් නාවික හමුදාව තියෙනවා, පොලිසිය තියෙනවා. අනතුරක් වුණාම අපි තමයි ක්‍රියාත්මක වෙන්නේ පළමුව. ඊට පස්සේ අපි බොහොම අමාරුවෙන් තමයි කතා කරලා කීප දෙනෙක්ට කතා කරලා තමයි මේ නාවික හමුදා ලාංඡික බෝට්ටුවක් හරි දාගන්නේ. අශීලාචාර ක්‍රමයක්. අපි උදාහරණයක් විදිහට ගත්තොත් ඇමති කෙනෙක්ගේ දරුවෙක් මුහුදට ගිහිල්ලා බිලි බාන්න කියලා විනෝදයට ගිහිල්ලා නැති වුණොත් කැලේක ගිහිල්ලා නැතුනම කීයක් තොපර දායිද මේ රටේ? කී දෙනෙක් ඇමතිවරු කතා කරයිද? කී දෙනෙක් වාහන වලින් යයිද? හොයන්න. දැන් දීවරයක් නැතුනොත් කවුද කතා කරන්නේ? කවුරුත්. ඉතින් දැන් බලන්නේ ලංකාවේ ආණ්ඩුව ඉන්දියාවට දෙන්න හදනවා. අතුරු දෙන්න හදනවා. ඉතින් මොකද්ද මේ තේ?
Thank you so much. It was finished there, yeah. And sorry, we should have told you clearly to put on the English interpretation here to hear the interpretation and to hear her reading out from the PDF that we had translated. I hope you could still get a little bit of the message. I will now try to share the screen for showing the third video. From Sustainable Development Foundation in Thailand. Can you see this?
อาหารทะเลสดใหม่ที่อยู่ตรงหน้านี้รู้หรือไม่ว่ากว่าจะมาถึงคุณมันแลกมาด้วยการต่อสู้เพื่อสิทธิของชาวประมงพื้นบ้านจำนวนมากพื้นที่สาธารณะในการประกอบอาชีพประมงเนี่ยให้น้อยลงทุกมันมีการบุกรุกมาต่อเนื่องสัตว์น้ำหายากจากเนี่ยลอยหน้าบ้านต้องออกไปไกลนี่1,000 บาท500-600 บาทสบายอันนี้ไม่ต้องไปหาไม่มีตัวเดียวยังไม่เจอเลยพอเราอยู่ในเขตอุตสาหกรรมปุ๊บภาครัฐเขาไม่ได้มองเราพออุตสาหกรรมมาผ่านปุ๊บเขาก็ขับเราออกระหว่างอุตสาหกรรมกับประมงของทุกอย่างมันต้องมาจากฐานรากถ้าฐานรากไม่เข้มถามว่าอนาคตมันไม่สำเร็จหรอกครับพื้นที่ทำมาหากินหลักของชุมชนชายฝั่งที่เป็นฐานชีวิตฐานอาหารของชาวประมงขนาดเล็กจำนวนมากของประเทศ แต่วันนี้ทะเลกำลังเปลี่ยนไป
เราอาจจะต้องตั้งคำถามกับทิศทางของการพัฒนาว่าการจะพัฒนาประเทศเนี่ยเราไม่สามารถที่จะไปมองเฉพาะเศรษฐกิจมหภาคในเฉพาะภาคประมงการมาพูดถึงประมงพื้นบ้านจึงมีความจำเป็นอย่างยิ่งที่สังคมจะต้องรับรู้
So thank you so much for staying with us, listening into those videos. Now I'd like to give the word to Naseegh to give some comments to this reality from small-scale fishers around the world.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it's sort of difficult to do because it is just so diverse. But I think in a minute, you know, if I could just capture a few words of what are the key pointers and elements that comes out here. I mean, the first one is livelihoods, that small-scale fishers do it, engage in this kind of fishing to make a living, to feed the family, and in many ways also support the community around them. And an immediate offshoot of that is the way that fishery is managed, is those management systems, in a sense, in many ways finds its roots in this communal activity. And it is not done with any outside influences or any outside kind of pressures. I think an important point that came out of Rosie's contribution or her reflection was fishing for her has a spiritual component to it. It is something that has meaning between herself and the sea and what she's doing. And there's a sense of satisfaction, a sense of living life comfortably, and a sense of connection with greater beings out in nature. And if you come down all the way to what we've heard later, is that this kind of connectivity for fishers is a sense of security in life, a security that is both spiritual, a security that is physical, a security that provides food, and there are challenges that impacts on it. And a key challenge that I think I heard is the one of encroachment, the one of where the spaces that this activity takes place is being taken away or being reduced. Pollution is something that I heard come up from the Sri Lankans, particularly because the grounds that they are fishing in is being polluted or destroyed by elements that just simply doesn't belong in the space where they could connect, where they could do their livelihood from. But an important issue there also was that the kind of fishing that they do is not a fishing that contributes to the macroeconomy. It is something that contributes to the local economy, to the livelihoods and communities. And I think those are all important elements and important messages that I got out of the few moments that people were speaking. And I think those are critical elements. There's a lot more that can be said about it. But in terms of what we just heard, you know, those are some of the key, very, very critical elements that I think makes up the nature and character of small-scale fishing. Meaning, in the end, small-scale fishing is not to be confused with commercial fishing or with economically rich fishing. It is a different set of circumstances. It is a different activity within its own space and with its own characteristics and within its own elements altogether. I am hoping I'm doing justice to what I was asked to do, but that's what I got out of it. And I think those are the elements that I think also lies at the basis of what went into the preparation and the development of the fishing guidelines. Obviously, issues of gender and culture and so on is included, but it's those sorts of issues that led to us realize that an instrument like the guidelines had to be developed, that because it's filling a gap that nothing else in the world fills. The UNCLOS doesn't provide for it. No other instrument in the world provides for it. There has to be something, there had to be something different, something for the sector. And that we believe is the guidelines. Thanks, Anna.
Thank you so much, Naseegh, for those great summarizing words and highlighting the most important aspects, I think, from those videos. I think you definitely did justice to them. Now we will move over to Ravadi. Ravadi from the Sustainable Development Foundation that we have to thank for this last video from Thailand. Ravadi is the director of Sustainable Development Foundation, which is a rights-based and environmental NGO of Thailand. She was very much engaged in the development and the political negotiations of the small-scale fisheries guidelines. So, and she's also a member of the Asian Regional Advisory Group of the Global Strategic Framework for implementing the small-scale fisheries guidelines. So we are looking very much forward to hearing more from you and what you have to share with us with regards to how these guidelines were developed. So the floor is yours, Ravadi.
Okay, do you hear me? Okay, so thank you, Hannah, and everyone. Greeting from Thailand. Thailand now is nighttime. Good morning to some of the participants from other regions. Good afternoon and good evening to everyone. I will share with you how the small-scale fishery guideline was developed and designed as a virtuous example of a participatory process. The short clip that you saw a while ago from my country and then from Sri Lanka and also from another clip may somehow urge all of us to think back on the context and situation of our brother and sister small-scale fishers in our home countries and in the country where you have been working or having the program. Although the clip reflects present situation that small-scale fisher now, the issue they are facing, it does as well remind me the subject of sharing and discussion of small-scale fisher nature, as well as the issues of small-scale fishers have encountered in the different part of the world at the first global conferences on small-scale fisheries organized in Bangkok, Thailand, my country, in the year of 2008. It was the initial starting development process of the guideline in which FAO organized, and it was my first forum as formal participation and engagement on small-scale fishery issues, share and discuss among many different people from so many parts of the world. On that occasion, I got opportunity to know and learn from many small-scale fishers, men and women representatives from WFFP, WFF, Global Network of Small-Scale Fishers, number of civil society organizations, and also including ICSF, who play a very big role working with FAO organized that forum as well. At the forum, we found many characteristics of small-scale fishers in common, that despite being different countries and regions, small-scale fisheries and fishing community represent a diverse and dynamic subsector with particular characteristics that depend on their location. They are often family enterprise in number of about more than some country 90%, some country 80%. Half of them are women. And on that occasion, I got also opportunity to know and learn from many small-scale fishers man and women, and also I know that they are the backbone of the fish economy, contributed to the strengthening the grassroots socio-economic where is the root of the country. I appreciate small-scale fishers provide good quality fishery products compared to the whatever product in the market. They're contributing to making food security for my country, and my country, Thailand, also food security to the world. They play a significant role in conserving and protecting coastal resources. However, as a result of decades, small-scale fishers have been neglected. In many countries, small-scale fishing community, although they contribute the largest share of the fish catch, continue to be poor and marginalized and deprived from their human right for socio-economic and cultural development. They face intense pressures from other sectors such as tourism, aquaculture, investment aquaculture, agriculture, energy, mining, industry, infrastructure development, as well as from commercial fisheries sector itself. The reality of small-scale fishers share and discuss becomes strong as the hard foundation and strong rationale for collective working direction in developing small-scale fisher guidelines. The first global conference of small-scale fisheries reaffirmed a need to develop small-scale fisher guidelines and that human rights are critical to achieve sustainable development, and call for international instrument on sustainable small-scale fisheries, and the need of using the guideline to make it work remain relevant and even more needed when we learn that the issue we discussed over the decade ago remain unaddressed. In real-life situations, small-scale fisher are being encountered in which it is not only happened in my country, Thailand, but similar issues are true as well in many parts of the globe. After the conference, I witnessed the guideline development process were developed to a unique participatory and consultation process since the start throughout the end process. They were consistent with and promote international human rights standards. Their working process were very broad, open, transparent, and participatory consultation with 1,000 of stakeholders. The small-scale guideline is the first international agreed instrument dedicated entirely to the small-scale fisheries sector. This guideline developed to a bottom-up process and intensive consultation with fishing community worldwide are mainly to enhance the contribution of small-scale fisheries to food security, nutrition, and support the realization of the right to adequate food, to continue the equitable development of small-scale fishing community and poverty eradication, and to improve socio-economic situation of fishers and the fish worker, and to provide guidance to state and stakeholders to adopt and implement ecosystem-friendly and participatory policies, strategy, and legal frameworks for responsible and sustainable small-scale fisheries. The draft was developed to participatory process from 2011 to 2013. Different seminar, workshop, conference were organized in different regions, part of the world where multi-stakeholder took part. The COFI in its 29th session approved the development of the guideline on small-scale fishery that would draw on existing instrument and complement the Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries. I appreciate the spirit of broad and meaningful participation with an openness guided the entire negotiation and the text during the technical consultation. It has been worked with unprecedented level of engagement and participation from civil society. VGSSF was finally endorsed in the 31st session. The Committee on Fisheries Coffee of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations and its 31st session in June 1914 formally adopt the guideline in the context of food security and poverty eradication. This guideline was developed as the complement of the 1995 FAO Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries. They address small-scale fisheries and encompass on the activity along the whole value chain and undertaken by both men and women. For one asked me, how do I feel about small-scale, this guideline? My answer, right away, the guideline is very special as it was created as the result of very long history and struggle of small-scale fishers themselves around the world, appealing for greater recognition of their status and the role in the fisheries sector and their country. It is one of another international meaningful instrument to address SSF issue itself encounter, in which a product of a strong heart, head, and hand of many significant stakeholders to guide our collective action addressing different aspects of small-scale issue encounter. We need to use it and make it work. The significance of the guideline is both a recognition of this reality by FAO member countries. That is very important for me because it is recognized from the government themselves. At the same time, an effort to bring small-scale fisheries back to the focal point of fishery development and management, considering of importance of small-scale fisheries for food security, nutrition, livelihood, rural development, poverty, and hunger eradication. It becomes clear that adoption of human rights-based approach in the guideline, therefore, was much more a consequences than a choice. For me, the guideline is a tool directed toward addressing conflict issues that emerge. It does as well directed toward sustainable development, supporting food security, nutrition, taking equitable development and poverty eradication, and also make the governance in management of fisheries sector. Personally, the guideline, for me, although it is very voluntary guideline, global in scope, and the component in the text very much fit to the need of fishery management of the country. Although it is only the guideline, but I think that to make it work is really, it doesn't have, and if it is compulsory by law, maybe it is better, but then even it becomes the guideline, but it is our guideline. And if we commit to work, it will work. The text covers governance of tenure in small-scale fisheries and resource management. Small-scale fishing communities should have secure tenure right to resource and form the basis of their special public infrastructure, as well as an issue related to decent work, occupation, health, safety, including safety at sea. It also ensures post-harvest actors as part of relevant decision-making process, support improvement to facilitate women participation in post-harvest, facilitate access to market. And also it addresses gender equality, inequality. State should implement and relevant instrument to which they are a party, such as CEDAW, and also establish policy and legislation to realize gender equality in this work. Moreover, it does as well include disaster risk and climate aspect, a climate change aspect, which is very relevant to since the small-scale fishery are vulnerable to the impact of climate change. For this, there should be specific policy and plan for climate change adaptation and mitigation, disaster risk reduction, and emergency responses, alongside addressing matters such as coastal erosion, pollution, destruction of habitat, and other issues. In my opinion, it is very good. Yes.
Can you conclude? Thank you.
Yeah. So at the end, I have to thank everyone who engaged in this, making this guideline, WWF, WFFP, CSO, CESF, and also recognize similar to what have been said, Janika Sharma, who have worked very tightly for this. So thank you. I think that with this, it is now our commitment to make it work. The guidelines exist and make it live. Thank you very much for listening to my sharing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ravadi. This was an excellent overview of the development of the guidelines and its participatory process. Very rich and gave us a good sense of how it was all developed. So now we'll move over to Lena Westlund, I should say in the Swedish pronunciation, because we're from the same country. We're very glad to have you with us, Lena, from FAO. So Lena, she has an extensive experience from Fisheries and Development Corporation. She's both lived and worked in country with food security in small-scale fisheries communities. And she was engaged, just as Ravadi, in the development of the guidelines. And now she supports FAO as a consultant to also implement the guidelines. So we're very interested to hear from you, Lena, about how the current state of implementation is. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Let me share my screen. I have a few slides that I want to share with you. I hope you see my screen and in sort of presentation mode. I can see some nods, so that's a good start. Well, thank you very much for giving me the floor, and thank you to Ravadi and Naseegh and Rochelle and everybody who has been speaking so far, giving the context of the small-scale fisheries guidelines and where they came from. I will perhaps add a little bit to this in a more generous sense, and also talk then a little bit about the implementations and some thoughts around the implementation of the guidelines. We already heard about the process of the development and where they came from and how the different consultations took place, but I wanted to show this slide anyway and emphasize this, that it was a really participatory process, and civil society, small-scale fishers and fish workers themselves played an enormous role in this. The guidelines are often referred to as the FAO SSF Guidelines, but I don't really like that, saying it that way. FAO facilitated the process, but it's really the guidelines of small-scale fishers and fish workers in the world, because they did the job of getting them into place. But also, once there was a text that had been provided by fishers and fish workers, this was also negotiated by FAO members. So governments have looked at this. The whole document was negotiated. We went through it word by word. Took about 2 weeks in total. So there is buy-in. It's a voluntary instrument, but there is definitely buy-in from governments. And also, of course, then the guidelines were endorsed by the FAO Committee on Fisheries, which then means by all FAO COFI members. So then a few words about the implementation, which is work in progress. As you can imagine, this is a very rich document, rich in scope and in covering the small-scale fisheries sector in a holistic way. So there's a lot of work in this sense. And the guidelines are based on the human rights-based approach. And this was also reflected in the development of them, I would say, with this participation and how the text was developed. And this approach, the human rights-based approach, should also then be used in the implementation. The guidelines themselves, they have a number of guiding principles which align with the human rights principles. And the small-scale fisheries actors are rights holders with governments as the main duty bearers. And to make this work and move forward, we need empowerment and capacity development. I will get back to this a little bit in a moment. But having said this, then there are also other actors supporting the small-scale fisheries guidelines. And we need everybody, all hands on board. Everybody needs to help in this process if we're going to make the change we would like to see. Again, though, governments and small-scale fisheries organizations have the main roles in this. And looking at this a little bit more closely, one could maybe see that one could divide up all of us who support the small-scale fisheries guidelines into these three groups, I'd say. Although that may be a wrong word of talking about dividing up, because we really need to work together, but still looking a little bit at different roles. So governments have a key responsibility to make implementation happen. And this requires then political engagement and investments in capacity and in participatory decision maker, because governments should not move ahead on their own. They should do this hand in hand with the small-scale fisheries actors themselves, who through their organizations are the main drivers of change and of course play a major role in the bottom-up processes. This also means that we need strong small-scale fisheries organizations that are representative of small-scale fishers and fish workers over the world. So that's where empowerment come in. And then there are the rest of us, FAO, NGOs, research institutions, etc. And we also have an important role to play, but I think we should see that as complementing and supporting and strengthening what small-scale fishers and fish workers and governments are doing, and make sure that we align our actions with their plans. This picture was shown early on, and Rochelle talked a little bit about it, but I wanted to show it again. And as you can see, it reflects my previous slide with these three parts of a framework, where we have the advisory group that primarily represent the small-scale fishers and fish workers and their global organizations. We have governments in the Friends of SSF Guidelines. And then we have under development, it's not quite there yet, but an idea of having a knowledge sharing platform where everybody else can also participate and contribute to the small-scale fisheries guidelines implementation. The advisory group has a very important role to play, the same way as small-scale fishers and fish workers were part of developing the guidelines, or not only part of, but leading the development of the guidelines. They should also be leading the implementation when it comes to how the guidelines should be implemented. I mean, also they are the ones who know best what is expected and how things should be interpreted and understood. So it's important for the rest of us to listen to them and take their advice. yes, I also wanted to add that this global strategic framework then is a global structure that FAO we have been supporting and putting in place, or are still supporting, since it's not fully there yet. But we have also regional advisory groups that was mentioned, like Ravadi is representing the one from Asia, for example. So this is becoming a global and regional network of some importance. Now, a couple of words of FAO and how we have supported the implementation of the guidelines. As I said, we facilitated the development of the guidelines and we're supporting their implementation. And these arrows here, they in a way look a bit at a timeline where at the very beginning we worked mainly on awareness raising and disseminating the guidelines and making sure that people knew that they existed. This is work that continues and that still needs to continue because still while the guidelines are fairly well known, it's not that everybody knows them, and so there's still a need for this type of work. We also work quite a bit on developing guidance materials and tools for the implementation of the guidelines, and some capacity development and empowerment of organizations and also of governments. And more lately, we have moved into supporting also more specific national level implementation, which is crucial in many ways, of course, because the impact and change will happen at local and national level. The overall strategy for this work can maybe be seen in two dimensions. One is having specific activities supporting specific areas of the small-scale fisheries guidelines with activities. And the other one is a more broader, where we would like to have the guidelines mainstreamed into policy, strategies, actions, legal frameworks, etc. And these are two mutually reinforcing dimensions. But I think if we could get the small-scale fisheries guidelines mainstreamed everywhere, so to say, then our job would maybe be done. Then the guidelines would be considered as part of how you do things with regard to small-scale fisheries. Capacity development was something I already mentioned. I wanted maybe to emphasize that again, and I think that in particular with regard to the main players in the implementation, there is a need for support, and this is also something we are working on, working closely with some small-scale fisheries organizations and also providing training and awareness raising for government officials to facilitate their engagement in implementing the guidelines. I also mentioned briefly the need for implementation at the national level, and this is also something we have worked on to encourage countries to establish national plans of actions, which would be a holistic tool for implementing the guidelines. And there are some countries who are moving forward with this. And in this context, I would like to congratulate Tanzania in particular, because they launched their national plan of action for SSF guidelines implementation just about a month ago, after a long process of consultations and participation of small-scale fishers and fish workers into this. And I think we have someone from Tanzania with us in this meeting, so really congratulations to Tanzania, and I hope many other countries will follow this. There are some who have started working on it, but Tanzania is the example of a country who has come the furthest, I think, so far. And with that, at the end of my presentation, I just wanted to take this opportunity as well to mention that next year will be the International Year of Artisanal Fisheries and Aquaculture. And this is, of course, a an important opportunity to further enhance the global awareness of small-scale fisheries and to continue promoting dialogue and collaboration among us all to achieve sustainable small-scale fisheries. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lena, for those really rich and clear presentation showing us the value of, again, of the small-scale fisheries guidelines and how it was developed. Excellent. Thank you so much. So now we'll move over to the last presentation, which will be done by Ratana Chempakdi from, she's in Thailand now, but she usually works in Canada, I know. She's a professor at the university at the Department of Geography at the Memorial University of Newfoundland in St. John's, Canada. And she also leads this major global research partnership, Too Big to Ignore, that I assume most of you have heard of, which aims at elevating the profile of small-scale fisheries and rectifying their marginalization, both in national and international policies. We look very much forward to hearing more from you. Ratana, the floor is yours to share about the future of the guidelines.
Sorry, thank you so much, Hannah, for that, and really appreciate the opportunity to be part of this very important conversation. Of course, you know, it's really quite emotional to hear. Joshua talked about Chandrika, remember well, right? What happened, you know, we went through a journey, many of us, many of you guys were part of that, right? So I think we have reasons to be happy about the guidelines, but it's also, as we are trying to look in the future, as is assigned to me in terms of the topic, I want actually to start from, I wanted to talk about these in three parts. I call the first part step 0, and then I'll talk about step 1. And in fact, the last part, I would call it step back, which is about the reflection before we think about moving forward. So from and I would speak mainly from the research network perspective, academics, right? Because in some ways, the step 0 is the fact that many of the researchers have been interested in small-scale fisheries topics for a long, long time. Many of these social scientists working in small-scale fisheries have done a lot of very engaged research, listening to stories, like what we heard in the videos, trying to conceptualize what we learn into some kind of theories and you know, some analytical framework that we can apply and use that to talk about the need to really pay attention to this particular sector, especially those that are marginalized and vulnerable. So we have concepts and terms that we use to relate to what we see on the ground. So at the time when you know, the conference took place in 2008, the one that Revati mentioned, we called it a people conference for a good reason, right? It's not just, the guidelines are not something for the small-scale fisheries, but to us, it is something by the small-scale fisher folks, and fisher organizations and CSOs that are supportive of small-scale fisheries. So as researchers, we were just really, you know, invited to participate in the process to help think about the principles that should be focused in the guidelines, to help doing this, you know, drafting of the 0 draft, for instance, right? And they aligned well with what we had observed, you know, as part of our research and what we continue to observe. So to see human rights-based principle being prominent in the guidelines, to see gender equity, to see other, you know, all those principles, including the rule of law and transparency, accountability, all the principles are really part of, you know, it's kind of reaffirm, right, that we are indeed looking on the right track at looking at the importance of small-scale fisheries. And really our research was aimed at elevating that, right, their importance, and help address that marginalization and trying to make them even more visible and make more awareness on the sector. So that was really a really good process. So the step 0 was actually well done, right? Especially with the whole consultation and the whole spirit of the guidelines. But our concern really about would it be implemented once we have endorsed it, once the guidelines were endorsed, would they be implemented? So that was step 1 for us. So we didn't hesitate, right, to take on the research that led to a publication of the small-scale fisheries guidelines, the book that we published in 2017. And people might think it's too early to talk about the global implementation at the time. But we really wanted to keep the momentum going, right? With the interest on the small-scale fisheries, can we already look at countries around the world and what we can learn from those case studies? So we had about 30 case studies, right, that spoke to the challenges that countries might be facing as they're trying to implement the guidelines, or opportunities that countries might have in implementing the guidelines. So the book really gave us a lot of insights about where countries were at that time, right? 2015, leading to 2017, in terms of what some countries can do better in terms of being more prepared, right? And then some countries are actually are still, trying to figure it out, what they need to do in order to implement the guidelines. So countries are were in various stages at that time. But it's fair to say that transition was happening. Countries were interested in co-management, participation. Lots of the principles that are in the guidelines are part of the national policies, the legal framework in the countries even, right? So the concept of governance was a very interesting point for us, because many countries didn't want to talk about governance, thinking that that's not something that they were doing. They were more into managing the fisheries. We argue, of course, that for small-scale fisheries, we need that governance perspective, because it's not just about managing the sector, but really take a more holistic look at the sectors, recognizing that it is integrated, embedded in a much broader context. So you see that, even human rights-based approach in order to implement the guidelines is not about management, it's about governance. So a major conversation about that. And many countries are in the transition, and they are really taking on a reform or transformation in order to, align better their governance system. And a framework that we have developed, which is we call unpacking the policy and legal framework of countries in order to see the alignment. We have now did a study on 25 countries, and we actually see that there's a much closer alignment between legal frameworks and policy documents that countries have and the principles and the topics in the guidelines. So we just published this paper in Marine Policy, and it's open access, so you can get a link and access that if you like. Basically, there's a lot of opportunities there, but we still have to think about it. And before I'm going to end my intervention here with the thinking about stepping back a little bit. We were excited, of course, to have the guidelines, and we think many people are excited. So because they are there for a reason. We know they are important. We know it's time that we have the guidelines for small-scale fisheries. And then we're excited about implementation. And we all want to do it. We all want to be part of it. But I always refer to the part 3 of the guidelines when I think about the role of actors into this process. And it's similar to what Lena just presented, right? We all play a different role, and we can be supportive. We can help enable the guidelines, the facilitation, facilitating the implementation, like the research that we do, or the link with the governments that sometimes we are able to do. The science policy interface, we can do that. We can provide evidence to support why we need to implement the guidelines, right? What we want to be careful with, however, is to recognize that there are many other agendas out there. At the time the guidelines were developed, there are other agendas as well. Blue economy, blue growth are there, have been developed and launched at about the same time. Sustainable Development Goals are there. So we need to figure it out how best to situate small-scale fisheries in the broader conversation so that they are being integrated into that big conversation as well. So that would be a really nice way to think about, how to really move forward with the guidelines. But I also want to call attention to the fact that, they're becoming very popular, right? It seems that all out of the blue, many organizations, many research groups are interested in the small-scale fisheries and put them as part of their strategies, which is really great to see, as long as they are working in a very complementary fashion and recognizing that our role is really there to support implementation of the guidelines, to make sure that they stay with the spirit of the guidelines, respect the voice and the rights and the ownership of the small-scale fishing people, and really do our best, right? Not to redefine the guidelines to fit our agenda, but to really work with the people who really have been a part of these guidelines since day one and day zero and even before that, and really see the guidelines as theirs, right? So I think that's something that we would keep in mind as we move forward into the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ratana, for those super insightful comments. I think they gave us all a lot to think about and digest. And we will be able to do that during this next cultural session. In this webinar series, we intend to have some kind of cultural session in all of them, just because we think that this gives another dimension to the understanding of the culture of small-scale fishers. And this time we only have a short one. Next time we promise you we'll have more. But this one is just a 3-minute song that I think Anna will turn on for us now. It's a song that was produced by Too Big to Ignore. So thank you so much for that, Ratana. It's done by a master's student called Asadeh Haddad from Iran, a master's student of music at the University of, the Memorial University of Newfoundland in Canada. So we look very much forward to hearing this song now.
I was born by the sea, just a fisher folk in me. Easy lives were never seen, and with justice just a dream. Big guys fished the waters bare, and the tourists came to stare at the little boats I share, and with justice just a prayer. All the seas under the sun are enough for everyone if the big bad boats are gone, and with justice living on. I am singing just to plead for the fisher folk who need to fish on but not for greed, and with justice guaranteed, and with justice guaranteed, and with justice guaranteed.
Excellent. Thank you again. Applause. I see people. Excellent. So now we will actually stop the recording and move into the question and answer sessions.